So, good evening, and welcome to the last talk of this 2022 edition of the New York Encounter on behalf of the organizers. My name is Gabriele Di Comite. I'm the president of the Friends of Takashi and Midori Nagai Association. I will be moderating this panel, and I will also be one of the speakers, together with Dill, who is here with me, and together with Dominic Higgins, who has kindly accepted to join. He's live from the UK in live connection. So I would also like to thank Somos, who has supported us in this event and has made this possible. So first of all, about the two speakers. So Dill is a historian and instructional designer at the University of Virginia, and he has been doing research in the field of the modern history of Japan, especially related to human experience in the war and in the aftermath of the war, especially about the non-military forces driving the reconstruction after the war. And he's author of a book which is titled Resurrecting Nagasaki, which will be the main topic of his talk tonight, and this is how I got to know him. And I can say we became friends, and this is one of the beautiful encounters we had after the association was started. And from UK, there is Dominic Higgins, who is a movie director. In 2003, he founded, together with his brother Jan Higgins, he founded a movie production firm called Pixar Revolutions Films. And this I really have to read, because they have produced a lot of movies in a experimental animated and live action video. The first one, I think it was The Wolf Who Came In From the Cold, which was awarded the International Digital Video Festival in Los Angeles Award and Birmingham TIC Film Festival, and many other very successful movies, including The 13th Day. And one of them was a big project, which is All That Remains, about the life and story of Takashi Nagai, and this is why Dominic is here with us tonight. So, what never dies? It's about Takashi Paolo Nagai. Many of you, some of you at least, I'm sure you know him from the book by Paul Glean, which you probably have read, which is called The Song for Nagasaki. And there was here in New York Encounter an exhibit about Takashi Nagai in 2019. So you might have heard about him, but not all of you probably. So Takashi Nagai was a young student of medicine when in Nagasaki. He came from a family which was not a Christian family, was of the Shinto origin. And he has always been strongly driven from a really strong urge for truth. This is really the force that has always driven him. I think that this is really the fil rouge of his entire life. And some happening in his life, especially the death of his mother, brought him to question the sense of his life. He immediately understood that life and death should have a meaning. And he had heard a lot about the Catholic faith. He decided to understand more about the Catholic faith, and he decided to go and live in Urakami. You have to remember this name. Urakami is the northern area of the city of Nagasaki, which was the place where for 250 years the hidden Christians of Japan had lived. So for 250 years in Japan there were very bad persecutions, and Christianity was almost completely cancelled. There were only a few thousand people living in the in the surroundings of Nagasaki, especially in the area of Urakami, and they were able to preserve and transmit the faith in this little area around Nagasaki. The descendants of the hidden Christians were there, and he decided to meet them. And in the encounter with the hidden Christians, and especially with Midori Moriyama, who would become his wife, he converted himself to the faith. Midori was for him an incredible testimony of what real faith and virginity is. Virginity, she was his wife, but she was virginity in the sense of total dedication of her life to her vocation, which was the vocation of wife for him. And it was really looking at her that he understood what real faith in life is. He dedicated himself completely to science, to his work as a radiologist, as a doctor, and as a university professor. And he dedicated so much to the radiology in those times that he developed leukemia. And by 1945, he already was affected by leukemia in a pretty advanced stage. On the 9th of August 1945, the second atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. And that hit exactly the area of Urakami, which had been the heart of Catholicism in Japan for around 300 years since the arrival of Saint Francis Xavier. Urakami was completely destroyed, and the wife of Takashi Nagai, Midori, died together with most of the people there. He survived because he was working in the radiology department and he was protected by the building. And after the destruction and the bomb, he has lost completely everything. The city does not exist anymore. His wife is not with him anymore. He has lost all his friends. He has lost his work, his colleagues. He is already affected by leukemia, and he will spend the remaining years of his life confined into a bed because of leukemia. He started writing books, and he became extremely famous. In his books, he shows the power of faith as able to bring life and hope in the total destruction. He became such a powerful testimony, witness of hope and peace, that his books became a great editorial success all over Japan and beyond Japan. He earned a lot of money from the books, but he donated everything because he decided to live in total poverty. The story of Nagai became so important for us, for me and a few other friends, that we decided to found the association, Friends of Takashi and Midori Nagai. And in these last 2-3 years, there were so many encounters, like probably two of the most significant are for sure the ones with Chad and with Dominic, and that's why we are here today. So I would like to show you now a short video before we start with the real part of this presentation. And in this video, I think we will get a bit of a sense of who Takashi Nagai was. So I wanted to show you the video because I would really like you to make the effort to realize the situation where Nagai was living. Because we will now, with the help of our friend John McCarthy, we will hear some readings from the beautiful book that Nagai wrote when he lived in his bed. And in order to understand the magnitude of what he says, we really should keep in our mind clear the situations where he was living. There was nothing anymore around himself. He had lost completely everything. He was living in a city which was completely destroyed. He had nothing anymore. He didn't have a house anymore, and he was not able to leave his bed. So let's hear from his own words how he was able to live in those conditions.
As soon as I wake up, the first thought that occurs to me every morning is that I'm happy. Again, today I'm alive. Even if I'm only able to use my hands and head, I find myself filled with enthusiasm, like a schoolboy eager to go on the morning of a class trip. It has been an achievement of this last period to find myself surprised every morning as I lie in bed, filled with this expectation of joy at the prospect of a new day. I am discovering that I have in me the heart of a child. If only we were able to carry out our everyday tasks with the passion of a poet, as if composing the verses of a haiku, how much beauty would permeate the workplace. We should turn our lives into poetry. We should let the poet's attentive and admiring gaze penetrate beneath the surface of things, so as to glimpse the beauty that hides itself in each thing, and allow that beauty to shape our every action and thought, whether we find ourselves toiling away in a noisy factory or tossing on a fishing boat far out at sea, or working in a shop among people. I have finally reached this new horizon. Beating within me is a child's heart. The life of a new day awaits me, real joy in this bed of mine, 6 feet long, that I cannot even leave. But it is life without the goad of duties and the ties of prohibitions that would stop the audacity of this heart that every morning sets to work anew.
As soon as I wake up, the first thought that occurs to me every morning is that I'm happy. Beating within my chest is a child's heart. The life of a new day awaits me. How is this even possible in those conditions to have these expectations at the beginning of a day? I mean, the question is really, is this guy disconnected from reality? Is this guy a fool? But then why do thousands of people, literally thousands of people, go and look for him every day? Simple people and people from all Japan, and then people from the rest of the world, and the emperor went and visited him, and the Pope sent him letters, and there were people from the world of culture, of science, and thousands of normal people were just going to visit him every day in search for a glimpse of hope and peace. He was the only glimpse of hope and peace that could be found in that moment in the entire of what remains of the city of Nagasaki. We should let the poet's attentive and admiring gaze penetrate beneath the surface of things, so as to glimpse the beauty that hides itself in each thing, and allow the beauty to shape every action and thought. How can he have this gaze? How can he see beauty in the total destruction of the atomic wasteland? Where is that beauty? How can he find beauty beneath the surface? Why was he able to do that, and other people were not able to do that? Well, this is a question that we have to ask Takashi Nagai. So,
the view I enjoy from my bed is by no means limitless. It's confined by the house's low wooden beam and the profile of the mountain beyond the church. Yet it is just enough to allow me to enjoy the feeling of a boundless sky, clear and bright, without the shadow of a cloud. I was reminded of the view of Urakami I had on the night of a full moon, a little more than 10 days after the city had been reduced to nothing by the atomic fire. That night, just like today, there wasn't a single cloud in the sky, and a clear light illumined the ash-covered hills. Up until today, no light like that had ever been seen. A night without the shadow of a cloud in the sky, and not a trace of a wave rippling across the ocean surface. A little more than 10 days before that night, here in Urakami, thousands of homes and tall buildings still stood out against the sky, beginning with the great church, when all of a sudden, tens of thousands of people found themselves wandering aimlessly and in anguished desperation, with the terrifying sound of air raid sirens filling their ears, each one clutching some object in his hands and regretting only that he was alive still. In an instant, the city was no more, and everything that was human, greed, love, hate, angry recrimination, had disappeared without a trace. That evening, 10 days later, there was nothing living to be seen, nothing moving. Just a hill covered in ash, illumined by the moon's glow, and not a thing left standing upon it to cast any shade. That city, once so rich in humanity, which had formerly animated so many shadows, was now a lifeless hill on which shadows were no longer visible. As I gazed upon it, I felt in my heart the transience of human life, and it occurred to me that every craving was senseless. My beloved wife was dead. My laboratory and my research had been destroyed. My home and all my possessions had been reduced to ashes. My health was already shot, and I knew that very soon I would no longer be able to work. Everything was gone. And yet, while I was thinking these thoughts, and as my gaze wandered out over the land, boundless and unshaded, I discovered to my surprise that I felt neither regret nor sadness at having lost everything. What perishes, perishes. What dies, dies. Seeing the few remnants of all that had been lost, I realized how foolish we are, we human beings, in our obsessive craving for things that die, and in fighting not to let them be taken away once we have secured them. At that point, I felt liberated. When I realized that what I had to seek was something that doesn't die, when I realized that I had to seek the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, a great new hope took root in my heart. The kingdom of heaven and his righteousness. These are the things that never perish, that we will never be deprived of. At that moment, my heart was also flooded with an indescribable light, untouched by shadows. A little more than 5 years have passed, and tonight the moonlight spreads itself as high in the sky as it did that night. The atomic wasteland is inhabited once more. Homes are being built, and the vortex of love and hate and greed of the human world once again appears to toss and turn. And the shadows have returned to the earth. And what about my heart now? Is it still like that night 5 years ago, boundless and without the shadow of a cloud? How precious was my feeling of nostalgia that night.
How precious was my feeling of nostalgia that night. That is the difference between Nagai and, well, I would say almost all the other people there. In the moment when the circumstances are more dire, the worse the circumstances become, the stronger the cry of the heart becomes. And that's the point where the freedom has to make a pure decision. Do I still want to listen to give credit to the cry of my heart? Or do I want to give credit to the temptation that everything is hopeless, that there's no possibility for life anymore? How precious was my feeling of nostalgia that night. That is the decision of the heart of Nagai. He realizes the preciousness of that moment. He realizes that until that moment, he had been searching for, at least he had been hanging to something which was to die. And for him, that is the beginning of a new life. From that moment on, he realizes what is true is not the life I was living before, is my nostalgia tonight, is the cry of my heart now. I need to find what never dies. So we asked ourselves, how is it possible to have that case? So this is the first resource that Nagai hangs to. It's the cry of his heart, which in that moment is stronger than ever in his life before. That's why he says, when I realized that what I had to seek was something that doesn't die, I felt liberated. But that's still not enough, because he has something else in his life. When I realized that what I had to seek was something that doesn't die, when I realized that I had to seek the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness. He says, a great new hope took root in my heart. He has something in his life. He has a seed of experience in his life that there is something that never dies. So that's his starting point after the destruction of the atomic bomb. The cry of his heart and the evidence in his life that there is something that never dies. That is the starting point for him. As he says in another beautiful book, I was starting a new life. What is most interesting to understand about Nagai in this moment is that if this is the starting point, then there is an entire journey that he decides to start. So this is the resources he hangs to, but then he starts a journey. And let's hear what this journey is.
5 years have passed since then, and our movement for peace has never ceased. We have continued without a break to proclaim the value of that sacrifice. But come to think of it, have we not missed something in all of this? Was it not we, the survivors, who misappropriated the sacrifice of those hundreds of thousands of people who gave up their lives in the atomic cloud in order to bring about peace? In order to maintain the world peace achieved by that sacrifice, another new sacrifice would have been necessary. Prayers that call for sacrifices without offering any of their own are just egotism. The citizens of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have prayed for peace. But what did they themselves offer in sacrifice for it? Have we freely offered such a sacrifice? Beginning today, we must engage in sincere self-reflection and offer another new sacrifice, greater than that of the atomic bomb. Let it be the day of a new prayer. Let it be the sacrifice of a change in ourselves, each for himself. A real movement for peace, in justice, with patience and love, and with humility and determination. The sort of life of poverty that I live of my own free will. I don't live this way because I have to. But how could I, alone among these people, live in luxury? It doesn't matter how much money I make from sales of my books. If we understand that the sole purpose that some are given so much is that they put it at the service of their neighbor, then it can no longer be said that heaven's plan is unjust. I've been given the ability to earn dozens of times more than that old woman over there peddling food from a cart. And it would not be according to heaven's will that I spend dozens of times more than her on lavish extravagances. To my mind, it is truer that I live on the same level as the peddler and use all the excess money to serve the needs of the entire neighborhood. In this way, my heart finds peace. These are the reasons why I choose to live in poverty.
This is the new life that he decides to start in that moment. He understands in his experience that there is something that never dies, and he wants to give his entire life to that. That is the sacrifice he's talking about. This, I would like all of us to understand this point, because I think that this is really the most important one. The sacrifice he's talking about is not the sacrifice of our life, of his own life. It's the sacrifice of his images. It's the sacrifice of his instincts. It's the sacrifice of what he was looking for in his previous life, to let everything go and give himself only to what never dies, which is poverty. Which again, poverty is being rich only of what never dies. This is the sacrifice that it starts. There is no spontaneity in the position of Nagai. It's a long journey, it's a long work on himself that he does for the remaining 6 years of his life. And it's this long journey on himself, which is the conversion of his heart, which is the source of the hope that he's able to bring to the entire city of Nagasaki. Because this is the point. What's the point of one heart like Nagai to change, to being able to experience this hope and this peace, if the rest of the world still remains in the same, like the entire city of Nagasaki in that situation? What's the point of the testimony of Takashi Nagai? Is what Takashi Nagai is showing us, is it true only for him, or is this the truth, the one with a capital T? Because if that is the truth, it must be true for us today and for the entire city at that time. And that's where it comes to our two speakers. So let me maybe start from Dominic. So Dominic, what's the point of the testimony of Takashi Nagai in your life? How did Takashi Nagai affect your life?
Well, I think I'd better start by how I discovered Dr. Nagai's story. Dr. Nagai's story, I think it's very much about providence. That's very much how we found his story a few years back. Initially we were working on a documentary that touched on the bombing of Hiroshima. And while we were there, while we were researching that subject, we started to come across stories about Nagasaki. And one name, well, really one title stuck out to us, and that was the Saint of Urakami. So that started us on the journey to find out just who was this so-called Saint of Urakami. We discovered that, well, it was a man who had this incredible story to tell. He was a scientist who had converted to Christianity, not despite being a scientist, but because he was a scientist. Today, Dr. Takashi Nagai is best remembered as an atomic bomb survivor and peace activist whose writing helped to heal a nation that had been completely devastated by war. In fact, his work led to him being honoured as a national hero of Japan. And today, that legacy continues to live on in the Takashi Nagai Peace Award, which was set up to promote writings and essays on love and peace from all over Japan. Takashi spent his final years living in a small hut in the middle of the atomic wasteland, writing a great number of books and essays, much of it centred on the atomic bombing. His most famous book, which you already mentioned, was The Bells of Nagasaki, which in 1951 was actually made into a film. Dr. Nagai even got to watch it shortly before his own death. So that book, that really seemed the natural place to start our journey. We bought a copy, and I think it was about halfway through when we said, this has to be our next project. At the time, we didn't know how we were going to do it. It was a very ambitious project to take on, but we knew we had to try somehow. So we visited Nagasaki, spent time in the locations, visiting Nokodo, Dr. Nagai's tiny hut where he spent his final years, which is now a museum, and had the opportunity to meet and talk with several of the survivors, the Bukashu, to hear their personal accounts, which, I mean, that through all that terrible devastation and unimaginable human suffering really did a sharp focus for us. So I think that's when the story became really a lot more of a commitment for us. But while we were there, we also wanted to find out more about Christianity in Japan, as this was going to radically shape Takashi's own life. It was through his faith that he would come to find meaning in the aftermath of the bombing, when we lost everything. So, and just as importantly, the woman who was to become his wife, Midori, was a descendant of the hidden Christians. Now, Christianity in Japan can actually be traced all the way back to 1549, when Francis Xavier first arrived in Kagoshima, which means that it actually predates Christianity in America. I mean, that was absolutely fascinating to learn for us. So we took the opportunity while we were there to visit Nara and interview Father Paul Glynn, whose biography on Takashi Nagai, A Song from Nagasaki, had been so inspirational for us while we were working on the screenplay. And while we were there, we had the opportunity to spend some time with a small Christian community. And that really did have quite a profound impact on me, which I wasn't expecting. It was just spending time with this small community, and it is very much a community that was just held together by this shared faith. Now, apparently, there has been some debate as to whether or not this community should actually be considered Christian at all. After all, they had to exist for much of their history separated from the church. But I've also read someone once described them as old Christians, and I like that. Reading and listening to their stories, some of which are still very much within living memory, it's like taking a glimpse into the lives of those early Christians, having to practice faith in secrecy and having to live under constant threat of persecution, punishment, and even death. There's something definitely very authentic about their faith. And while we were there, we actually attended a mass being led by Father Paul Glynn. And that, for some reason, I felt really moved during that mass. I mean, the words sounded beautiful spoken in Japanese, and maybe it was because I'd come to learn their history. Remember, this is a community that's experienced real persecution up until very recent times. But it's strange to think that Takashi himself described his first experience in a church, which was a Christmas Eve Mass, as feeling something which I've been later described as a living presence in that church. So that was fascinating. Now, our film project took us about 5 years to make, and it was a real struggle at the time. But for myself and Ian, it was an absolute privilege to have had the opportunity to get to know Dr. Nagai and Midori and to learn their story, to learn about this part of history, which, to be honest, was a complete mystery to us when we started. And the Catholic Church has already honoured Takashi with the title Servant of God, which is befitting a man born into a samurai family, for all the word samurai means to serve. He's already on his first step to sainthood. But to many people in Nagasaki and around the world, Takashi Nagai is already considered a saint. We're very grateful to Gabriele for reaching out to us and letting us know about the friends of Takashi and Midori Nagai, and for allowing us to continue on this journey. I'd like to pass you back to Gabriele and Chad.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dominic. So after 70 years, 80 years, we are still here talking about Takashi and Midori Nagai. So it's really the power of one heart that converts and shows the beauty of faith, how faith is able to restart hope and life in the worst possible condition that you could imagine, that is calling us here together today. But it's not only us today, because what is even more interesting is what is as interesting as this is what happened at the time of Takashi Nagai in the city of Nagasaki. And this is what I would like to ask Chad. Chad has done an incredible job. And what is more interesting is that he has done this research with the eyes of science, of history, and not with the eyes of faith, because he really did it for his professional researches. And he was, sorry if I don't want to anticipate what you're going to say. I just want to say that he was interested in understanding how the restarting of Nagasaki started. And he ended up realizing how crucial was the testimony of Nagai, who had been living in that hut, 2 by 2 meters, without even going out, and still he was able to move an entire city around his testimony. So, Chad.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending in person and attending online. And to my daughter who is attending online, rest assured, as promised, I am wearing the socks with the pandas on them. I won't be able to see them. I'd also like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizers and volunteers of the encounter and to my fellow panelists for the opportunity to speak to you all this evening. I begin with a photograph taken by the United States Marines in early 1946. They called the Urakami district the Valley of Death because of its level of destruction, the presence of rotting corpses still underneath the rubble, and the persistent radiation which made even the American Marines fall ill with radiation poisoning. I share this photograph to help you get a visual idea of the devastation from which Nagasaki had to rebuild. My entire professional career began with a single encounter. Exactly 21 years ago this month, my brother Matt and I visited the Atomic Bomb Museum in Nagasaki and came across an exhibit dedicated to the Catholic community of the Urakami district, whose neighborhood was literally ground zero of the atomic bombing. In that exhibit was this photograph and a description of Nagai Takashi and his post-war work writing about the city's experience. I was fascinated by the fact that Nagasaki was home to the largest community of Catholics in Japan. I was confused by the realization that a mostly Christian nation, the United States, had dropped a bomb on that community. And I was compelled to learn more about them and especially about their parishioner leader, Nagai Takashi. And so, at the museum's bookstore on our way out, I bought one of Nagai Takashi's books, Leaving These Children Behind, which I hoped would also strengthen my Japanese reading skills. Upon returning to the United States, I began reading the book and came across the following passage, which appears in a chapter aptly titled Providence. Amid his description of hundreds of dead schoolgirls whose corpses lined a riverbed, Nagai wrote, "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Let us always praise the name of the Lord. Those of us left living who saw the dead thought that the atomic bomb was not divine punishment at all, but that it was no different from the expression of some profound plan of divine providence. That same day, I too had become a weak, penniless person and had embraced 2 small children in the fire ruins. I don't know what it was, but I believed and never doubted that this was the expression of the providence of love. I have endured 3 years since the bombing, but the fact that my faith that day was correct will gradually come to be proven. Because of the atomic bomb, the obstruction that was blocking my righteous path was removed, and I became able to taste true happiness. Death that will come to me soon is also the greatest gift of love that I confront, I, who am God's and who increases in his infinite love." Now, my initial feeling after reading this passage was that my reading comprehension in Japanese was absolutely terrible. I was sure that I was reading something incorrectly, because how could a person who had endured so much trauma and suffering interpret the bombing in such a light? I read the passage several more times and realized, yes, that's exactly what the Japanese text was saying. So my next reaction was, what? For me, this moment turned into a decades-long scholarly quest to historicize and comprehend the context of Nagai's interpretation of the bombing and the effect that it had on Nagasaki memoryscapes. I've since published a book in 2018 entitled Resurrecting Nagasaki, Reconstruction and the Formation of Atomic Narratives. Nagai Takashi, of course, figures largely in my discussion. What I concluded from the 15 years of research that preceded the publication of the book was that Nagai Takashi was the most influential single contributor to the reconstruction of Nagasaki City. From 1945 to 1947, Nagai contributed first to the spiritual recovery of the Urakami Catholic community as their parishioner leader. The atomic bombing killed approximately 8,000 of the roughly 10,000 Urakami Catholics. Many Catholic survivors felt that God had forsaken them, or that the bombing was some kind of divine punishment. Some non-Catholic believers from the southern part of the city have been saying as much, that the Catholics were being punished for not being Shinto believers. In response to this, and as a way to help process the trauma of the bombing, especially the loss of their loved ones and other community members, Nagai Takashi developed his argument that the bombing was not divine punishment, but rather a manifestation of God's love for the Urakami Catholics. Nagai, too, had lost his dear wife, Midori, and he needed to find meaning in her death and in the suffering of the survivors who lived with immeasurable trauma. Nagai took the opportunity of a mass funeral service for the Urakami Catholic community amid the ruins of their cathedral on November 23, 1945, to convey that narrative of the bombing to help them make sense of the trauma and begin community and individual recovery. During the lengthy eulogy, Nagai declared, "If one considers the fact that the atomic bomb, which had aimed for the vicinity of the prefectural office in the heart of the city, drifted to the north because of the weather, and fell in Urakami right in front of our cathedral, along with the fact that this atomic bomb was the last act of war and fighting did not happen anywhere on Earth after it, one will realize that there exists a deep connection between the destruction of Urakami and the end of the war. In other words, the Church of Urakami was placed on the altar of sacrifice as atonement for the sin of humankind, which was the World War. It was chosen as a pure lamb, slaughtered and burned. We believe this. Alas, the great Holocaust that was made in the presence of this cathedral on August 9th and duly ended the darkness of the Great World War and shined the light of peace. Even in the nadir of sadness, we reverently viewed this as something beautiful, something pure, and something sacred. Let us always praise the work of the omniscient and omnipotent Lord. Let us give thanks for the Church of Urakami having been chosen out of the entire world to be offered in the Holocaust." The word Holocaust in Japanese is hansai, meaning, of course, in its original meaning, burnt offering unto God. Nagai Takashi's eulogy gave meaning to the destruction by framing it as a providential tragedy. It exemplified atonement for the sin of humankind, which was the World War. And only the Urakami Catholics were the worthy sacrifice for the burnt offering or Holocaust. The bereaved took Nagai's message to heart. One community member recalled decades later, "We were convinced by Nagai's interpretation of the bombing, even the people who had thought it was divine punishment." Another member shared how Nagai inspired the Catholic community with his leadership and service, explaining, "He was such a good person that some people thought God had delivered him to us." When Nagai became bedridden with leukemia, which he had contracted before the atomic bombing, he decided to begin writing as much as he could to leave a record of the experience and significance of the atomic bombing. This led to the second stage, so to speak, of his contributions to the reconstruction of the city. From 1948 until his death in 1951, and really beyond, Nagai's work as a writer contributed to the physical rebuilding of the landscape of Nagasaki City. During that time, he published 9 books of his own, 2 edited volumes of essays by other survivors, and 2 translations of books by Western authors. He also wrote books and essays that were published posthumously. His books came at a crucial moment for the recovery of Nagasaki, when the city, and indeed all cities around Japan, struggled to secure funds for the reconstruction projects. Oops. Nagai's first major best-selling book was Leaving These Children Behind in 1948, which was the book I had brought home with me from the Atomic Bomb Museum in February of 2001. In its first year of printing, the book sold 220,000 copies. A national newspaper poll in September 1949 of the most read books over the previous year included 3 books by Nagai Takashi: Leaving These Children Behind at number 1, The Bells of Nagasaki at number 4, and Rosary Chain at number 16. Incidentally, the translation of John Hersey's Hiroshima appeared much lower at 19th. Nagai's books earned him massive royalties. During the 1948-1949 fiscal year, when Leaving These Children Behind and The Bells of Nagasaki were published, he earned 2,176,333 yen in royalties. Even so, he never considered this enormous gain in wealth his own. Rather, he thought it belonged to the people of Nagasaki, and so he gladly paid around 90% in national and city taxes, and he donated the majority of the rest of the income directly to the city. When the public expressed surprise and confusion over why Nagai had to pay so much in taxes, he told one of his friends, "The payment of tax is a shared responsibility for the reconstruction of Japan. Taxes are the oil for the reconstruction of our country." The popularity of Nagai's books also helped bring national attention to the special case of Nagasaki as an atomic bomb city, resulting in additional funds. In 1949, Nagasaki jumped to the top of the list, along with Hiroshima, for national reconstruction funds. Until then, Nagasaki had been 31st on a list of 41 cities slated to receive those funds. Hiroshima had already sat pretty highly at 6th. In response to the resulting national reconstruction law, Nagai Takashi decided to donate the rest of his royalties after tax to the Nagasaki International Cultural City Construction Fund to improve the infrastructure of the city. He believed that donating to this fund directly would help the entire city, including Urakami, to all rise at once. When a friend asked Nagai why he didn't put away more money for his children, he responded, "We must raise the general level of the area. If everyone improves, then my children will also improve. The revitalization of Urakami and the reconstruction of Nagasaki are our serious responsibilities." In other words, for Nagai Takashi, writing books was his way of working to lay a foundation for the future of all of the children of Nagasaki. When I received feedback on the earliest draft of my book on Nagasaki, one of my mentors said or criticized that my chapters on Nagai read like an official hagiography, as though I revered him like a saint. I found her comment fair but also strange, because in the interest of full disclosure, I am not Catholic, nor am I religious, to be honest. So why did my chapters on Nagai come across, as she put it, overly hagiographic? At any rate, I wanted my book to be as objective as possible, so I revised, rewrote, edited down the chapters on Nagai. But even after so many revisions, his presence in the post-war history of Nagasaki's reconstruction, as I tell it in my book, remains so prominent that it might still strike some readers as overly hagiographic. Nagai has not been without his critics, even in the present. I, too, have discussed Nagai critically from a historian's perspective, especially in regards to how his narrative of the atomic bombing has sometimes overshadowed the atomic experience of other survivors, both Catholic and non-Catholic alike. But as a historian, I must also acknowledge the context within which Nagai had worked. The devastation and uncertainty of the immediate post-war period had called on him to be a spiritual leader and community advocate. For Nagai, the most important mission that he undertook at the time, I think, was keeping faith alive at all costs, because he understood and truly believed in the role that faith could play in bringing the city back from the brink of oblivion. In other words, and while my own faith has remained broken since childhood, studying Nagai Takashi introduced me to the power of faith, and especially to how faith can illuminate a path to recovery, even out of the darkness of the so-called Valley of Death. I would like to end with a poem which Nagai considered a prayer, expressing optimism for the future of his children, Nagasaki, and the world. The English translation is Nagai's own. Heiwa yo, heiwa no kane wa naru. Kono heiwa wo itsu itsu mademo. Peace, oh peace. The bell of peace is tolling. We must keep this peace forever. Thank you.
I can only comment what Chad and Dominic have said, mentioning again Nagai, because this is really the key message that I would like us to bring home, not only at the end of this panel, but at the end of, at least what I experienced from this New York Encounter edition of 2022. I heard a lot talking about the struggle of nowadays with the pandemic and with many other issues we are going through. And the basic question is, where is truth here? How can we restart living in such difficult conditions? He says, 5 years have passed since then, and our movement for peace has never ceased. We have continued without a break to proclaim the value of that sacrifice. He's referring to the sacrifice of the atomic bomb. We can talk about the sacrifice of COVID. We can keep on our movement for peace, our movement for any social claim that we have, for anything which in our life we want to claim and demand. But then he says, but haven't we not missed something in all of this? Beginning today, we must engage in sincere self-reflection and offer another new sacrifice, greater than that of the atomic bomb. Let it be the sacrifice of a change in ourselves, each for himself. So this is the magnitude of Takashi Nagai. He's not just what he did. There is a consequence. All the donations, the way he helped reconstructing the city, that is the consequence of the work that he did on himself, of the sacrifice of himself to let go everything that dies and give his life entirely to only what never dies. It's the sacrifice of conversion. I can only conclude this with one sentence, which many of you have probably known several times. The forces that change the history are the forces that change the heart of a man. And this is, I have never seen a demonstration so limpid, so crystalline of this. The transformation, the conversion of the heart of one person has been able to change an entire city from a cultural, social, political level, and after 70 years, we are here from Japan, Italy, UK, US, talking about these guys, because this is really true. The strength that changes the world in all the struggles we are facing is the power of faith, the conversion of our hearts in faith. So with this, I would like to thank again my friends Chad and Dominic from UK. Thank you very much for taking part of this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much again to Somos, who made this possible, and to all of you who have attended. I can only suggest you to to read this beautiful book, which for now you only find on Amazon, which is called Thoughts from Nyokodo. It's by Takashi Nagai. Of course, the book Resurrecting Nagasaki by Diehl, and the beautiful movie All That Remains by Dominic and Higgins. And that's how we can continue this adventure.
Thank you so much. Well, if you have one more minute to spare, I understand everybody's tired. I'm tired myself. Not tired of the encounter, just tired physically. A couple of thoughts. You know, we opened the encounter saying that we can build on desire. And I believe that we had a chance to verify that throughout the weekend. What we saw, the people we met, the things we heard. And think of Nagai. I mean, the man didn't have an army. He didn't have a plan. But he lived fully, intensely, what he was given, and with his childlike heart and with his presence and work changed the world around him and gave his city life again. So, as Monsignor Albacete would say, something happens. Can be the atomic bomb, can be what we're going to read in a second, the discovery of something which has always been there but we've never seen. And can be something that happens at the encounter, can be the encounter. It wakes up our desire. So the invitation is be faithful to this desire and let it happen, take over our life, and that, as we've just seen, in God's time bears fruit. Now, Dennis will read us a very, very short passage from Pirandello's Chaula, which is a nickname in dialect for crow, but it's a human being, as you will hear. And what happens to Chaula is precisely what I was hinting to. Suddenly, you see something that you'd never seen before. And your desire for full life is reawakened. Be faithful to that and let it bear fruit. And in the end, as you will hopefully give Dennis a round of applause, I would like to extend an applause of gratitude to all those who made the encounter possible. More than 300 volunteers, your generosity, our speakers, everybody. Thank you.
Chaula discovers the moon. As soon as he came out of the mine, he was astonished. The load fell off his shoulders. He raised his arms slightly. He opened his blackened hands in that silver clarity. Big, peaceful, as in a fresh and luminous ocean of silence, the moon was in front of him. Yes, he knew what it was, but he knew it like many things we know and never care about. And why should Chaula have cared that the moon was in the sky? Now, only now, thus emerging at night from the bowels of the earth, he was discovering her. Ecstatic, he sat down on his load in front of the exit. There she was. Over there she was. Over there, the moon. The moon was there. The moon. And Chaula started weeping, without knowing, without intending to, out of a great consolation, out of a great sweetness he felt at discovering her over there as she climbed in the sky, the moon with her broad veil of light, oblivious of the mountains, of the plains, of the valleys that she filled with clarity, oblivious of him because of her he was no longer afraid, nor tired, and the night now full of wonder.
So thanks again, and God willing, see you next year.